Welcome, everybody. My name is Stephanie Strafacci. I am the Assistant Public Affairs Officer at the U.S. Consulate to Almaty. And we have here with us today Duman, our very talented interpreter. And thank you for joining us on Facebook Live to hear from Debra Zimmerman about Women Make Movies. Debra is the Executive Director of Women Make Movies, a New York nonprofit social enterprise that supports women filmmakers with distribution and production assistance of their independent films since 1972. She has been on the juries of film festivals around the world and is the recipient of numerous awards, including the New York Women in Film and Television's Changemaker Award and Hot Docs Doc Mogul Award. The U.S. Consulate wants to thank the American Film Showcase for supporting this program and building the consulate's connection with expert filmmakers throughout the United States. We encourage everyone watching to continue following us on social media to stay updated when we have filmmaking events and explore creative expression, building professional capacity, and inspiring storytelling through film. We also want to thank the 48-Hour Film Race, who supported our AFS Summer Academy and Debra's workshop. The 48-Hour Film Race is the ultimate film competition in Central Asia, and it builds and strengthens its network of filmmakers across the region. Please visit the social media at 48HFR to find out more about the 48-Hour Film Race, and very soon that registration will open. Even if you don't submit a film, you won't want to miss viewing these online winning films this year. So please show your support, your interest, and explore answers to your questions that you want to know about women and film by asking a question in the comments below. Express your thoughts, give us a like, a heart, a hug. We hope that you will learn a lot today, and it will inspire you all to keep being creative and telling your stories. And so over to Duman, and then please join me in welcoming Debra Zimmerman.
Thank you, Duman, and thank you, Stephanie, so much for introducing me. I'm really happy to be here, although I really wish that I was in Almaty in Kazakhstan. I've wanted to go to Central Asia for a long time. But through the magic of Zoom, of course, the upside is that we get to reach more people than if I was there in person. So today I'm going to speak with you a little bit about the history of women filmmakers, also some of the challenges that they faced, and finally, some of the really fantastic things that are happening worldwide to support women filmmakers. I've been the executive director of Women Make Movies since 1983, and I actually think this is the first time that I'm giving this talk, and it has a very happy ending. So I'll go ahead and we'll start the show. So, as I said, I'm going to start with a very brief history of women in film. This is a picture of Alice G Blushey, who was the world's first woman filmmaker, but she was also the first person to actually make a fiction film, a film that told a story. In 1896, she made a film called The Cabbage Fairy, which was about the idea that a woman could go into a garden and get a baby by looking under the cabbage patch rather than having to go through the pain of childbirth. So most people think that the Lumiere brothers were the first ones to make films, but it really wasn't. Unfortunately, although she made more than 100 films, she had to fight to keep her name in the history books. She was actually one of many, many, many women filmmakers who were making films at the time. And in fact, there were more women making films in the 1920s than up to and maybe even including today. Some of those filmmakers included Lois Weber, who was mentored by Alice G Blushey. Women were mentoring back then as well as today, as well as Cleo Madison and Dorothy Davenport Reed. And actually, Lois Weber was the highest paid director at Universal Films back then, and she was making $5,000 a week, which was an incredible amount of money back then. And she mentored actresses in her films like Cleo Madison and Dorothy Davenport Reed, who went on to make rather feminist films about sexual harassment, violence against women, forced marriage, and sexual harassment. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, though, by 1927, Lois Weber was out of work, and most women were not working in film anymore. what happened? What happened was that Wall Street came to Hollywood, and Hollywood became a big business. And once it became a big business, women got pushed out. The difference was that silent pictures became talking pictures. And when they became talking pictures, the budgets were 5 times as big. And when budgets get big, unfortunately, women get left out. One of the very few women to make it through and continue making films until the 1940s was Dorothy Arsner, the woman that you're looking at over here. And she actually created the boom that filmmakers still use to get sound on the film set. She made it by attaching a microphone to a fishing pole and hanging it over the people who were being filmed. There were other women making films at the same time. We've just found out just recently, Esther Eng is a Chinese-American filmmaker who was just discovered to be making films around the same time as Dorothy Arsner. And Ida Lupino actually made films up until the 60s. These are the only 3 women that were making films in the United States for almost 30 years. And they made films which featured women. Dorothy Arsner made films that starred Katharine Hepburn. This is one of my favorites. It's called Christopher Strong, and it's about a woman who wants to be a pilot, or is a pilot rather, and the man who loves her. And Ida Lupino made very hard-hitting feminist films about rape, outrage, and also about unwed mothers in a film called Not Wanted. When I was in college, I realized that the very first film that I ever saw by a woman was a film that Ida Lupino made called The Trouble with Angels, which she made in the 60s and was the last film she made. Although there were other women making films around the world at this time, they didn't come to the US, but there were women making films in Argentina, like Maria Luisa Bemberg, Safi Faye in Senegal, who's considered the mother of African cinema. Matilda Landeta was making films in the 1930s in Mexico. And also I had the chance to meet her. So she was still making films in the early 80s. And in the Soviet Union, actually, women did have opportunities to make films. In fact, a bit more than the US. And Kira Muratova was one of the most critically acclaimed filmmaker. And Agnieszka Holland in Poland was actually one of the only women that's ever been nominated for 3 Academy Awards in different decades. But really, these women were the exception. They weren't the rule. And it was actually in the 1970s that Women Make Movies was started in order to help women to make films in the United States. The organization was started with a very specific idea. Since there were so few women that knew how to make films, that they would do workshops to actually put cameras into the hands of women. It was a very community-based idea, and they put signs up like this one. This is actually one of the original signs that they put up in churches and laundromats and grocery stores, saying to women, if you want, come make your own movie. They made 40 to 60 short films on subjects like how to cut up a chicken so that you could save money, or Better or Worse, a drama on how a woman's life changes after marriage. For 10 years, Women Make Movies helped women make films. And after 10 years, we started one of the first women's film festivals in New York. But what was happening in New York was happening all over the world. And there were many other women's film festivals and women's film groups working to help to create a generation of women filmmakers. Looking at on this slide is the Créteil International Women's Film Festival, which is the largest women's film festival in the world, which has been happening since 1980 and continues to this day in France. And in fact, the festival showed the first retrospective of Kira Muratova's films, which then led the Cannes Film Festival to show her film and launch her on her international career. But in fact, although women were making a lot of films independently, it was still really difficult for women to get films made in Hollywood and the mainstream international film industry. This is a social media meme that we made only 7 years ago, because from 2009 until 2013, only 5% of the films released by the major studios in Hollywood were directed by women. But what happens if men are making all the movies? And why is it important for women to make films? What we get are films that don't reflect the reality of women's lives. In fact, they barely show women's lives. The Bechdel test is a test that was actually created as a joke in a comic strip. In the comic strip, two women are walking down the street, and one of them says to the other, "Do you want to go to the movies?" And the other one says, "Nah, I really don't want to, because I have a rule. I only go to a movie if it has two women in it that have names who talk about something but men." Sorry, I put my Zoom on my slideshow. There we go. So here are some of the films that fail that test, which is a very simple test. It just means, are there women in the movie? Two women. Do they talk to one another about something other than men? Here are the films that fail. All the Harry Potter films, Avatar, the original Star Wars trilogy, the entire Lord of the Rings series, and almost all of the Disney animated films. BBC studies showed that almost half of the films that were made until 2013 failed the test. What does that mean? What that means is that you're not seeing films. And this little chart here shows that only 31% of the speaking roles that are women's roles, 31% of the roles in films are spoken by women, which means that 2 out of 3 people that you're listening to are men. And what do these women that speak look like? What are they wearing? Well, they're not wearing very much. 28.8% of the women wore sexually revealing clothes, as opposed to 7% of men. And 26% of the women get partially naked, while only 9.4% of men do. That's why it's so important for women to make films. We know that the way that women are represented in films affects our self-esteem, it affects the choices that we make, and it has a huge power over the way that we see ourselves and what we want with our lives. But enough of the bad news. Finally, things are changing. And one of the reasons that they're changing is because there are more women in leadership all around the world in the film industry. The woman that you see here is Anna Serner, who is the head of the Swedish Film Institute. In 2013, she said she is going to create equity for women in film. At the time, only 34% of the Swedish films passed the Bechdel test. She said it would take 5 years to get 50% of the films being made in Sweden made by women. She did it in 3 years. And that's been a model for other countries in Europe. There have been incredible movements in the last 5 years in which women have come together and people of color have come together and said, time's up. Oscar So White called attention to the lack of people of color in films. And of course, the Me Too movement talked about sexual harassment and worse. And women actresses took the lead with the Time's Up campaign and have been speaking out about the inequity in Hollywood. Women have been supporting women, hiring women. Actresses have become producers. And in this case, McDormand introduced the inclusion rider. Rider Skuchinia, yes.
Rider Skuchinia, but rider inclusive, yes.
And what that means is that actors and actresses can put a section in their contracts that say that they insist that there is equity in the hiring practices in Hollywood. The inclusion rider came out of a study which was done actually at USC, which hosts the American Film Showcase. And there are 3 different places in the US alone and others outside the US that are keeping track of the statistics and letting us know how well or how badly women are doing. There is a campaign in Europe, which started again in France, called 50-50 by 2020. Now, of course, it is 2020 and we haven't reached equity, but it has had an impact. One of the things that it's had an impact on is asking festivals around the world to sign a gender parity pledge that they will work and make significant increases in the number of women showing in those festivals. And in television, I'm sorry for the very boring slide, but in television, there's been an amazing increase in the number of women who are creating TV programs. These are programs for Netflix and Amazon and some of the other major studios. And almost 50% of those series have central major women characters. There are literally more than 100 initiatives going on all over the world to help women filmmakers. Just a small sampling of them. One of my favorites is Picture Parity, which is a website where you can go and see a rating of movies and television to see how well represented women are in front of and behind the camera. There's a investment fund called the 51% Fund because women are 51% of the population. And though it's not shown here, there's a funder called Chicken and Egg Pictures, which only funds women filmmakers all over the world. Mm-hmm. Chicken and Egg Pictures is only one of the groups which is listed on the Women Make Movies website. These are funders that fund women's films, women's film groups, women's film festivals. The women film festivals are all over the world. They're not just in the Western countries. There are 2 women's film festivals in China. There are women's film festivals in Uganda, Zimbabwe, South Africa, India, Turkey, Taiwan, among others. When I was doing my research to update this presentation, I found an article that said that 26% of independent Arab filmmakers are women. That was from 2018. In Egypt, the Cairo Film Festival became the first Arab film festival and the second African festival to pledge 50-50 by 2020. And this is important for Women Make Movies because, hold on, I moved this again. Because Women Make Movies works with women filmmakers from all over the world. We're actually almost 50 years old, and in the last 5 years, we've helped women to raise $22 million to get their films made and return $2.5 million in royalties for the films that we distribute. We distribute more than 700 films by filmmakers from more than 60 countries, and they've screened in more than 86 countries around the world. And films from both of our programs have been nominated or won Academy Awards in each of the last 13 years, including Sharmeen Obai Chinoy, who was the first Pakistani filmmaker to get an Academy Award, and last year's Chai Vasarhelyi, who won the Best Documentary for Free Solo. At Women Make Movies, we believe that the moving image is really special. It's radios, newspapers, journals, all rolled into one. And films have the ability to influence, create social change, and in fact, change lives. They provide the films that we distribute provide inspiration and empowerment to those whose voices are seldom heard. More than 50% of the films that we distribute are by women from the Global South or women of color. Sorry. Our more than 700 films provide inspiration and empowerment to those whose voices are seldom heard. The topics are on violence against women, immigrant issues, health concerns, racial equality, labor issues, and in general, empowerment for women. There are many films that we've distributed which have had the power of changing women's lives, but I will just tell you one story before I finish. One of the reasons why we think it's so important to support women making films is because they tell stories that are not told in the mainstream media. Quite a few years ago, there was a woman who was making a film about a subject that nobody had heard of. It was about the fact that rape was being used as a weapon of war in the Congo in Africa. She made this film before the story hit the New York Times. So by the time the world was beginning to hear about it, we were able to distribute a film which looked in depth at why this was happening in the Congo. We had the opportunity to show the film to a small group of people, which included the wife of the UN and of the US ambassador to the UN. And as a result, she brought the film home. The US ambassador saw it and introduced a Security Council resolution to help protect the women in the Congo. This is the power that film has, and this is why Women Make Movies continues to work supporting women filmmakers. And I'm very excited to have the opportunity this week to do workshops with women and men in Kazakhstan. Sorry, it will be in Central Asia because it won't just be in Kazakhstan, to help support their efforts to make films. And just one last thing before I finish. I'm very happy to tell you that our Alice G Blushey, our first woman filmmaker, the woman that was lost from history, that there was a film that was made by a woman filmmaker, and she's finally getting to be known. I'm absolutely happy to take any questions that people might have. And I think, Stephanie, you're going to moderate this.
Yes, so please leave your comments in the box below if you're watching from, well, of course you're watching from Facebook Live. Give us a like, a hug, a heart. But Debra is open to answering your questions now about Women Make Movies and everything she just presented. So please do leave your comments. Somebody already from Kazakhstan did not put their city, says this is very great and informative. So we do have a question rolling in. Someone from our Almaty page wants to know, do you know any female film directors from Central Asia?
Yes, I actually do. I'm going to make a mess of saying their names. And I'm so glad you asked that because I really wanted to make this part of the lecture, but I was short on time. First of all, there were women from Tajikistan and from Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan that were making films in the 1930s. And I don't know that I'm going to be able to find their names easily. Okay, so there was a filmmaker. There was a film that was called The Covered Van that was written by a woman, directed by a man from Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan. There was also a woman named Lydia Petrorina of Tajikistan, who was the first woman filmmaker in Tajik cinema, and also the first to direct a Tajik feature film. The film was called When the Emirs Die. Now, current day, there are also women who are making films. And I found a program, a really interesting program in Singapore that was just held this past year, which was called Whose House Is This? The New Cinema of Central Asia. And the amazing thing about the program is that 7 of the 9 films were directed by women. Okay, and here's where it gets more difficult. There is the film Face the Music by Katerina Suvorova. The film Mariam by Sharipa Urazbayeva. Suleiman Mountain by Elizaveta Stisova. Sorry. I told you.
Mhm.
Songs of Abdul by Anna Moisinko. So that's just some of the films that we're showing. There are others. So I encourage you to look it up. The series is called Whose House Is This? And I want to say that I was really pleased to see that Mariam Sharipa Urazbayeva's film was shown in the Toronto Film Festival last year, which is one of the most important festivals in the world. Excuse me. And Katerina Suvarova's films have screened at the Locarno Film Festival, and one of the films won an award in the Czech Republic, as well as other festivals. So I see there are other questions, so I'll stop talking about that now.
That's okay. And actually, what's fun is that Katya Subarova is the one who posed that question. So she is watching.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Who are tuned in right now. Do you have a favorite film made by women or about women that if you had to pick and say, watch the film?
I can't. You know, I'm probably one of the few people in the world who sees more films made by women than men. And I see so many documentaries for work that I tend to watch a lot of television. But I will say that we're very lucky right now because there are really hundreds and hundreds of films, wonderful films by women directors on all of the streaming services that you can have access to. There are smaller television services that don't cost very much money, like streaming services, like one called Ovid and another called Criterion, where people can have access to independent films made by women. Yeah, next question.
Okay, so there's a question. Are Women Make Movies resources available, accessible for any female filmmaker to apply for funding?
Yes, but it is more difficult than for American women. We don't provide funding, but we help women to get funding. And most American foundations fund American filmmakers. That's why it's more difficult for us to support women from outside the US for our production assistance program. But there are some foundations which fund international filmmakers. And if you have a project that you think is going to be competitive and get funding from those US funders, we can support you and sponsor you. You should send us an email with a sample of your film. You need to have something shot, a proposal, and a budget. And we definitely are interested in looking at completed films for distribution. Yeah. And that's why I said I watch television, because I have to watch so many films that get submitted to us from filmmakers from all over the world.
So you had a lot of questions kind of about very similar topic come in at about the same exact time.
Okay.
So if it's all right with you, because there's always different ways to answer a question, or it'll prompt something that maybe you didn't add. I'm just going to kind of go down the list, even though some of it may be repeated. It's great for people who are joining us late too. So our next question came from the 48-Hour Film Race Network. How many women from Central Asia did the internship you mentioned earlier? And then did you mention an internship?
No. Maybe she could explain which internship she's talking about.
48-Hour Film Race Network. Could you explain the internship that you mentioned in your comment? And then we'll circle back around. And then Dasha, also from the 48-Hour Film Race Network, asked, is it possible to get support for her film from Women Make Movies? You touched on that a little bit. And the movies that you mentioned, could you, I guess we can try to...
Here, you know what? I'm going to put the movie... Okay. maybe Duman, you can translate.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I heard the last part right. So movies that you mentioned, you want, what was the question? Do you want their names to be put in the chat? Is that correct?
Yeah, I just put all the names of the films that I mentioned by Central Asian filmmakers into the chat.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we'll wait for the clarification on the internship. The question was about support for films from Women Make Movies.
Yeah.
We touched on that a little bit.
Yeah.
And a similar question also from the 48-Hour Filmmakers Network. Does your organization issue grants for film production? And if so, what are the conditions to apply for participation in them?
I actually think I explained that. We don't give grants. I want to be very clear. We don't give funding. But if you think that you have an idea that is going to be able to get funding from a US funder, we will sponsor the application so that it's possible for you to get the funding.
And may I clarify before I translate?
Yeah.
Debra, when you say sponsor the application, sponsoring doesn't mean money. It means...
No, it doesn't. Okay. I'm going to explain something and then you can... So in the US, there are foundations that give grants to make films, to filmmakers, but they are not allowed to give money to individual filmmakers. They must give money to a nonprofit organization, and we are a nonprofit organization. It's called fiscal sponsorship. So that's the way, so we offer that sponsorship if the filmmaker is able to get a grant. So they must apply, they have to do that, but then we will help them by being the organization that receives the money and gives them the money. And if they're in our program, we'll look at their proposal, we'll look at their budget, and we'll give them suggestions. But first, they have to do the work of creating.
Thank you very much.
I know, it's a lot. It's a lot. I know.
Thank you. So for our next question, Daria from the 48-Hour Filmmakers Network wants to know, how do you build a community among, I'm going to insert, I think, among women in film as women, sorry, probably a translation thing here. How do you build a community of women given that the film industry is male dominated?
So I'm glad you asked that question because community is so important and networking is actually one of the keys to women's success in film. And it also gives me a chance to tell you that we have a Facebook page at Women Make Movies, and we have a group that you can join of women who took part in a virtual film festival that we had. Hopefully we'll do another, but you can talk with other women who are making films and watching films by women. But reaching out to other women who want to make films and forming your own little film group, and it can be an online WhatsApp group or a Facebook group, is a wonderful way to start creating community. I didn't mention, and I should have mentioned, that there are women in film chapters of women filmmakers all over the world. Not yet, I think, in Central Asia, but maybe soon. You can start a Women in Film chapter.
Sorry, Debra, may I clarify?
Yeah, Women in Film is an organization that exists. There's chapters all over the world. There's New York Women in Film, Los Angeles Women in Film, Turkish Women in Film, Toronto Women in Film. It's in cities all over the world. And they can start in Central Asia. They were started by a small group of women getting together and talking about the issues facing them in the film industry. And it grew all over the world. I'll also give you another suggestion. I have a friend who started a group called the Film Witches, and it's 13 women that meet once a month and help to support one another. And they've been doing this for 15 years. I want to go to, Stephanie, if you're there, I want to go to the question from Nat from 48 Hours. Is that okay?
Nat, yes. Yeah, we can jump down to that. So the question is, in your opinion, how are films directed by women inferior to films directed by men? Or not inferior at all? I tend to think the latter, but we'll go ahead and let Debra answer this question. How brave of you.
Well, first of all, I don't think that films by women are inferior to films directed by men. Or I should say, I don't think that films by, I don't think that films by women are inferior to films by men. And that, in fact, is at the heart of what Women Make Movies is about. Films by women are different than films by men. We are raised differently. We have different influences, and we see the world in a very different way. And because of that, I, as a woman, relate more to films which are made by women. Films by women make women the central character much more often than men make women the central character, which is understandable. Somebody else asked a question about how I got involved with film. And I will say that I got involved with film because I saw a film by women, and I realized that I saw myself in that film, where I hadn't really seen the kinds of things that I think about and feel in films. And it was very important to me. But I will say that I think that it is really important for more women to make films, because women are, sorry, I'm going to go back, Duma. I once heard Spike Lee speak, the African-American director, and he said that it's more important for Black people to make films. Oh, this is really complicated. Okay. There was a white director that wanted to make a film about Malcolm X, and Spike Lee was very upset because this white director wanted to make this film. And somebody from the audience asked, does that mean that you can only make films about Black people? That you, as a Black director, can't make films about white people if white people can't make films about Black people? Mm-hmm. And he said something very important for me that is very much about the issue of women making films. He said, no, because Black people live in a world dominated by white people. Black people know white people, but white people don't know Black people. Women live in a world dominated by men. It's very hard for men to tell our stories because they don't live in a world dominated by women. That's my answer.
Thanks, Debra. So jumping back, we had a question from Jana from the 48-Hour Film Race. Could you please say what equipment you need at a minimum to start film production? That's always a popular one. I actually have curiosity on that too. And what affordable camera do you recommend? Can you shoot a movie on your iPhone 10?
Okay, so I'm going to say,
joining our film workshops, there's a lot of opinions about this. So let's hear it.
Okay, so I have to say that I am not the best person to answer this question because I don't make films. We work on the business side. We help women with marketing and distribution and financing, not so much with the actual production of films. But I will say that someone once said, a very good photographer said, the best camera you have, the best camera you can use is the one that you have. And it is totally possible to make really good films on an iPhone 10. There's an incredible film which was made by the director who made the Florida Project, I believe. Tangerine, I think, was the name of the movie. And it was shot completely on an iPhone. And it wasn't even an iPhone 10. And that was a feature film that showed in the movie theaters. Yes, it's called Tangerine, and it was directed by Sean Baker. But I also want to say that I think it's really important to make good short films if you want to start a career in film. Don't begin with a long feature film. Start with a really good short film. Short films, if you make a good short film, it can show in festivals all over the world. The film can be 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It doesn't need to be very long. It just needs to be very good. And when you're a young filmmaker, it's very hard, or even not so young, just emerging. If you don't have a lot of experience, it's very hard to make a feature-length film. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think when we have these conversations, we get into some broad ranges of topics, and they're bound to come up. We can't escape reality and the real events that are taking place in the world as we speak. But I will, because of time, because we have to interpret everything, I'm going to only ask the questions that are substantial to the context of the theme. So I apologize if I skip over some questions that just we'll have to make the judgment of whether or not they're relevant to the theme, which today is women making movies, telling the stories of women and women filmmakers. So apologies if I have to skip over your questions to keep with the relevant ones. So we'll move forward. We have a question from Dina wanting to know where she can learn more about the platform for women in Central Asia, or there might even be some platforms, especially as we're in the digital age, to network with female filmmakers from all over the world. Debra, do you know of any communities that maybe you can join online or be a part of at a distance that some of our viewers could look into?
So first of all, I'll just mention again that Women Make Movies has a group on Facebook that you can join. There are a couple of simple questions you need to answer, but we accept everyone into the group if you're serious about wanting to connect with other women and men who are interested in women's film. But there are also, there are so many women's film groups from all over the world that have groups on Facebook. I think that's really the best place to go. I don't love Facebook, but for this, it's a good thing. And just put in women filmmakers in the search in Facebook, and you will find groups that you can join. But I do want to say, unfortunately, you do need to know English in order to connect with the international community. I'm very lucky because English is my native language. But I don't say that you need to know English because it's my language. It is the language, the international language of film. So it's very important if you want your films to show and to be seen outside your country, and if you want to connect with filmmakers from outside your region.
We are starting to come to the close of our program. We have about 20 minutes left. We've got one question here, and then we may have time for one more, but then we'll have to move into closing remarks. So this question, what is the role of men when we talk about women who make movies and telling the stories of women? Why is it important for men to learn about this aspect of filmmaking and these differences?
Wow. Hang on. I want to take a note so I remember what I want to say. So first of all, I think it's very important for men to see films by women, because I think that it helps them to see the world through the eyes of 51% of the population and to gain empathy for women. Last night, Michelle Obama spoke at on television, and she talked about the importance of empathy in our lives, that empathy brings us together and it creates a better world. So number one, I think it's important for men to be part of the audience for women's films and to support seeing women's films. But we also need men to be producers. I go all over the world to film festivals where filmmakers present their films in production. And so often it's women producers producing for men directors, and very rarely the other way around. It's also really important when men and women make films together that men are careful to give women the credit and the title that they deserve. When Charmaine Chinoy was making Saving Face with a male director, she was not originally the co-director of the film. She was just shooting the interviews in Pakistan. And Daniel, the director, asked us if we could help to get this film made because it was about an important issue, women whose husbands throw acid in their faces because of dowry in Pakistan rather, sorry. And we said, we would really like to, but we work with women directors. And he said, well, you know, Charmaine she's shooting the interviews because I can't as a man, the women won't talk to me. So I should think about making her the co-director. He did, and the film was nominated and won an Academy Award. And it was the first of 2 Academy Awards that she's won, and she's become one of the most important South Asian women filmmakers in the world, in documentaries. Mm-hmm. I think this is a great example of the way that men can support women in film.
Okay, we do have one more question. I will request that we be brief in the response because
okay. Sorry.
That's okay. So Mansoor from 48 Hour Film Race asked, you mentioned you're in the business side of this movie industry. When you choose to distribute movies, how do you make that decision? What kind of movies do you consider good?
So it's very difficult. We get a lot of submissions, and each year we can only acquire around 20 films, and that's from all over the world. So it's very competitive. And our decision is based not only on how good the film is, but it also needs to be based on our marketing strategies for the year. We ask ourselves, what are the other films we're distributing? Will we have time to handle this film the way it needs to be handled? Are there other films on a similar subject that we're releasing so that we can do them together? It's a good question, what is good for distribution? And for us, we're looking for films that we can use to show the world through women's eyes. And in particular, we work with a lot of colleges and universities. We are not a commercial film distributor. We're an educational film distributor. So we look for films that can educate people about the lives of women around the world. Is that short enough, Stephanie?
That was super short. Thank you so much. Okay, so with the few minutes we have, I want to just say thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. We've really enjoyed working with the American Film Showcase and 48 Hour Film Race, and this time with Debra Zimmerman to put on this wonderful public engagement for you. From here, Debra will teach a 3-day workshop with selected participants, which will conclude our AFS Summer Academy. But that's not the end of film opportunities for you. please follow the 48-hour film race on social media at 48HFR. Registration's opening soon. You can go to YouTube, check out their page, subscribe, and watch all the films from last year. We continually put out professional development workshops with US experts on film. So please follow us and stay tuned on future opportunities, workshops, presentations just for you. I'll let Duman take over from there, but let me just say thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you very much for inviting me to make this presentation, and thank you to the American Film Showcase for having me as one of the experts, and thank you very much to Duman for doing, I think, a wonderful job. Okay, so now bye.
Теперь до свидания.
Bye, до свидания.